Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome you to another Asian American Scholar Forum, AASF webinar. The topic of this timely and important town hall webinar is state of play, laws, policies, and issues that matter to the Asian American scholars, scientific, and research community. My name is Xiaodong Zhang, a member of the AASF. I'm also a professor of computer science and engineering at The Ohio State University. I'm very pleased to introduce the first two speakers of the webinar, Professor Kai Li, the vice president and founder of AASF, and Gisela Kusakawa, the founding executive director of AASF, who is also the moderator of the webinar. Professor Kai Li is endowed chair professor at Princeton University. His research has made a big impact in the field and impact our daily life. He was the early advocate for using networks of PCs and servers to solve computational problems in parallel. He pioneered the distributed shared memory and developed user-level communication mechanism for computer clusters, which is foundational to a communication standard infinite band used in today's high-performance data centers. As a principal founder of Data Domain, he led the development of deduplication storage systems that revolutionized the storage ecosystem for backup and disaster recovery. He was co-PI with Fei-Fei Li of ImageNet, which propelled deep learning to the forefront of machine learning. He has been elected as an ACM Fellow, IEEE Fellow, and a member of National Academy of Engineering. Gisela Kusakawa is a public interest attorney and executive director of AASF. Both her current and prior role, he played a strong leadership and made a tireless effort to end the Department of Justice China initiative and prevent any future iterations through numerous legislative actions. She was the lead legal strategist and drafter for amicus briefs in support of high-impact cases, such as for Dr. Xi, Dr. Tao. Gisela is a recipient for the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of Washington, D.C.'s Rising Star Award, and a leader in the Asian American civil rights and the legal community, having served or currently serving on multiple nonprofit boards and legal or bar associations. Kai and Gisela, the floor is yours now.
Hi, you're on mute.
Thank you, Xiaodong, for the introduction. First, I want to mention AASF was co-founded by 15 Asian American scientists or scholars. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to welcome you to this State of Play hosted by AASF. Today's gathering comes at a critical moment of our community, especially for Asian American faculty and students in universities across the country. Universities across the country are facing growing uncertainty and fear. Research grants have been suspended and student visa revoked, often without clear explanation. The recent termination of Professor Xiaofeng Wang has raised serious concerns of whether his university follow appropriate due process and whether in practice the China initiative is returning. These developments are sending a chilling message, particularly to Asian American scholars who feel increasingly targeted. This is why it's especially meaningful to begin this event with a keynote from Congresswoman Grace Meng, the new chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific America Caucus. Congresswoman Meng has been a champion for our community. Her leadership in defending the rights of Asian American scholars and calling for accountability and fairness in federal actions has made a real difference. We're deeply grateful for her continued commitment and honored to have her with us today. We thank you all for joining us to show that the scholar community is united and strong.
Thank you so much, Professor Kylie, for that warm welcome. And thank you all so much for joining us. Now, a few logistics before we start. We welcome everyone to add your questions to our chat or to our Q&A. This is ultimately a town hall. This is an opportunity for the community to speak up and to engage with our expert speakers, our policymakers and leaders within the community. Now, we are so honored today to have Congresswoman Grace Meng provide keynote remarks. Just a little additional remarks and background for Congress Meng. She is the first and only Asian American member of Congress from the New York State and the first female Congress member from Queens since former vice presidential nominee Geraldine Ferraro. She serves on the House Appropriations Committee and also on the Subcommittee Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies. Just to emphasize how important the Appropriations Committee is, it is responsible for funding the federal government's agencies, programs, and activities. We are so excited that you will also be the new chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Before entering public service, she worked as a public interest lawyer, and she is also joined here by her tremendous staff, including her executive director, Judith Teruya. So thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace Meng, Congresswoman from New York and chair of KPAC. I really want to thank Gisela and really everyone on the team at AASF. Thank you so much for all that you continue to do on behalf of our communities and for lifting up voices that really need to be heard in the last few years, but especially now. In the 101st days of this administration, they have taken actions to cut Medicaid, revoke birthright citizenship, close the Department of Education, eliminate language access, and implement across-the-board tariffs that raise costs for families and small businesses, to name just a few items. And these are all initiatives that would really hurt our communities. I don't have to tell anyone here. We just came back from a press conference where our small business owners, different political stripes, are terrified about the increased tariffs and how it's going to impact our communities across the country. And as the current administration decimates the federal government's ability to serve and support AANHPI businesses, nonprofits, communities, and families, KPAC's role remains unchanged. It is our job and my role as chair to protect our communities from harmful policies and to ensure that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders have space at the decision-making table. KPAC also strongly opposes all efforts to reinstate the harmful China Initiative, which, as you are all familiar with, was a federal program created by Republicans to counter the threat of economic espionage and trade secrets theft conducted by or for the benefit of the CCP. When active, the program was not only incredibly ineffective, but also led to numerous instances of racial profiling and discrimination against Asian American and Asian immigrant scientists, researchers, and academics. It did nothing to meaningfully address national security concerns and instead created a deep chilling effect on research and scientific innovation, as well as ruining the lives and livelihoods of those who were falsely charged. These actions also resulted in a brain drain of scientists, researchers, and scholars working on cutting-edge research that would help the United States become more competitive on the world stage. And following the implementation of the China Initiative in 2018, departures of US-based scientists of Chinese descent increased by 75%. And that legacy continues to invoke fear and xenophobia to this day. My team at KPAC will continue to track developments of anti-China legislation introduced in Congress. I'm also deeply concerned about the Trump administration revoking student visas and green cards across the country without any explanation. Most recently, a Republican lawmaker even introduced a bill that would ban all Chinese nationals from studying in the United States. Cultural exchange through university programs has made our economy stronger and more competitive on the global stage. And while we must remain vigilant in protecting our national security, targeting only Chinese students in legislation to revoke student visas is xenophobic and wrong-headed. No policy should target individuals solely on their nationality. We cannot give in to fear-mongering tactics that will restrict the freedoms and economic opportunities that make America the envy of the world. The important contributions of our Asian American scientists and academic community should be encouraged and celebrated, not unjustly targeted. This is why I am grateful for AASF's continued advocacy in this space. Thank you so much for providing a space like this virtual town hall to bring together these experts, advocates, and people, family impacted, to address these critical issues. I look forward to continuing to work with you to protect Asian American research, academic, and scientist communities from unjust and xenophobic policies. Very grateful for all of your work.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Grace Meng. We have some time for a brief Q&A. I see that Professor Yiran Chen has a question, if we're able to unmute him. Professor Chen?
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks so much for the inspiring talk. My name is Yan Chen from Duke University. I have one question, which I also put on the chat. There are so many attacks on the college and universities and also scholars, across the board. So we want to know if there is any, or concerning to CAP, AC, and how do you think that the scholar community can best engage our lawmakers to prevent further attacks, during this hard time? Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I think in general, what we have seen out of this administration, and look, I'm not trying to be political, but if there have been proposals, announced, a lot of times we've seen the public speak out, right? Provide stories, testimonies, data, facts. And sometimes the administration then reverts and takes a step back. We are concerned, for example, that the Trump administration, in collaboration with the Republicans in the House, will seek to reinstate the harmful China initiative. Last year, I led a letter to House and the Senate leadership to strike language directing the DOJ to reinstate this program through the appropriations process. And so thankfully, this measure was removed from the final legislation. So we do have to keep an eye on this, even in the budget process. They try to sneak language in. And, when they first created the China initiative, it directed suspicion at researchers and scholars, while really failing to meaningfully safeguard our national security. But this is a time when groups like AASF and each and every one of you, your work and your voices are so important. You will convene these briefings and webinars As you all see on the ground, the impact of these attacks on our education systems, we have to get these stories out. So please tell AASF, there's no story too small. Everything builds upon each other and helps us to create that sufficient narrative to push back. Feel free to contact us, our team as well. And I think we all need to, including myself, do a better job at working with a lot of our grassroots organizations. A lot of times this was kind of happening, in the mainstream news or in your own individual scientific academia communities. But I found that even in my district in New York, a lot of everyday community leaders who might help and who might want to help mobilize did not really have a full understanding of what was going on. And so if we can even work with so many of our local leaders and community who want to help you if they know what's going on and how we can, effectively push back together.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng. And I know you have a busy schedule today and we're only able to join for the keynote, but we thank you so much for joining for a little bit of our Q&A and having your team members, Judith here, to respond to any other further questions. I know we have quite a big stream of questions here, so I'll go next to Hai Tao on your question, if we can unmute him.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I have a quick questions. So because for the scholars, when we encounter, for example, unfair treatment, many of us don't really know what to do. So whom should we contact first? And should we reach out, for example, to whom, by phone or by email? Thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't know if that was for me, but I'll jump in before I sign off. Again, talking to AASF, sometimes we don't know all the stories. We don't know what's happening on the ground individually. And what's most helpful is when we see patterns or where we see things are happening and we're able to better weave that narrative to tell your stories and to show even our own colleagues what's happening, that this is not a random isolated incident, that it's happening in many districts and many schools. And so, please reach out to AASF. Please reach out to our office as well. We want to be able to have your stories, have these stories so we can more actively engage, like I said, our own community leaders, because that's helpful as well. And then, what we've been saying is, in terms of students with visas, to the administration, we want due process. We want the facts to be known, and we have to continue to push and to ask for that. And I don't know the percentage of Chinese Asian students amongst the 1,000 student visas, but the administration, unlike any other Republican or Democratic administration, isn't really communicating with Congress. And it's not just Democrats. They're not really communicating with the Republican leadership or committee chair, even my own committee chair as well. So, yeah. Right. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng. Well, next I see a question from Gabrielle Young, and I think this question actually very appropriate for Judith, if we can unmute Gabrielle.
Hi, Gisela. Hi, Judith. So nice to be in the space with you all. Just wanted to hear from you all about what you all feel that state governments or even state and NHPI commissions like us over here at the California Commission on API Affairs do to help our communities and scholars being impacted. For example, here at UC Berkeley, we have a registered 20 students who've had their visas revoked and further being investigated. And so, especially with Beyond Peace dissolution, what can we do at the state level to protect our communities? Thank you so much.
Hey, Gabriel, thanks so much for the question. Would also love to hear from my colleagues across different academic institutions of how they're handling this. But I think, it's really important now more than ever for there to be strong coordination between all the levels of government, since there is really just we're dealing with sort of policy questions that we haven't seen before. And so, you all sitting in a state commission have the benefit of the backing and the vantage point and the resources from your state government, and are seeing so many different institutions within your own state who are facing and having different conversations about how to handle this, whether at the scholar level within faculty members or at the student level. And so California has an excellent state delegation. So many of those members are our KPAC members, and the executive board, from our chair emerita Congresswoman Chu to our first vice chair Congressman Mark Takano. And so really just being in continuous conversation and communication, so that we are understanding what you all are seeing and dealing with at the state level, and are able to have a strong advocacy chain to the chairwoman's earlier comment about making sure that we are really highlighting those stories and getting that message across to the most effective folks, whether that is, a coordinated communication from us to the administration about the unintended consequences of some of their policies, or whether that looks like outreach within Congress to the appropriate committees of jurisdiction, or moving legislation. I think that coordination from state commissions like you, who are close to the ground and seeing what your universities are dealing with, is so important.
Thank you so much, Judith, and thank you for that question, Gabrielle. We do have a tight town hall, and we want to make sure that all of our speakers have a chance to share a bit of their insights. Just want to reassure everyone, we will have a Q&A at the very end of the town hall. There is a special segment that we have added for today, understanding from many feedback within the scholar community about their concerns regarding the matter of Professor Xiaofeng Wang. And so we are just so honored and grateful today that his wife, Nian Lima, is making her first public appearance to share what is happening to her family and how the scholar community can help. So Nian Li, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me here, and thanks for this opportunity. My name is Nian Lima. I'm the wife of Professor Xiaofeng Wang, whose case many of you may be aware of. I know there are a lot of news and rumors out there, and I want to have this opportunity to share my family story from my own voice. We're not just a news story, we're real people. My husband and I moved to the US 26 years ago, chasing our American dreams just like many other immigrants. We settled down first in Pittsburgh and then in Bloomington, where my son was born, and built our family and home for over 20 years. Every time I walk into my husband's home office and see him proudly cover the walls and his shelves with the certificates and trophies of my son, I'm reminded the loving home we have created and all the sweet moments we have had here. Recently, our life has taken a drastic turn. As reported in the media, we have been the victims of government search warrants and misplaced accusations of academic misconduct. This is sadly reminiscent of past cases brought under the so-called China Initiative, which has been widely recognized as having been a dismal failure and having a misplaced focus on loyal Chinese Americans and lawful immigrants such as my family. What happened on March 28th has completely devastated our home. Every morning I wake up thinking this. I thought it must be a bad dream. I just can't understand how the university, to which we dedicate over 2 decades of our lives to, could treat us like this without even telling us why or going through due process, especially for my husband, who is a tenured professor. It hurts deeply that a country we trusted and contributed to for so long now treat us like criminals. I've lost weight and have had difficulty sleeping. I feel trapped in a constant state of worry and sadness. What have we done to deserve this treatment? We are just desperately seeking answers. But through all this, we felt support and kindness from the community, from AASF, and from you. Your compassion and generosity means everything to us. Our family is determined to fight not only for ourselves, but for the broader research community who would be impacted if this type of allegations go unchallenged. I ask for your support to continue this fight by contributing to help us paying our legal fees so that we can continue to challenge this injustice. Your help makes us believe that the brighter day will come. Thank you for standing with us and being a part of our journey toward justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyan Lee. I know this was a very difficult decision for you to come and speak out publicly. So we just want to honor and thank you for having the courage to talk. Next, to offer more additional context regarding the matter of Professor Wang, we have here Professor Gang Chen, the Carl Richard Sardberg Professor of Power Engineering and Director of Papalardo Micro and Nano Engineering Laboratories. He is also a civil rights icon and an inspiration to many within the community. After Professor Gang Chen, I'd like to welcome Brian A. Sun, who is a partner at Northern Rose Fulbright. He's a seasoned trial lawyer experienced in complex business litigation, white-collar criminal defense, and multi-jurisdictional investigation matters. He has represented clients such as Dr. Wen-Ho Lee in successful civil lawsuit against the United States governments. So Professor Gang Chen, why don't we start off with you first?
Thank you, Gisela. Nyan Lee's story is heartbreaking. The images of the ABI raid of Nyan Lee and Professor Xiaofeng Wang's home brings chills to our spines. It brings back the fear my family and many others lived through under the China Initiative. Reading the news report about the event, one cannot stop asking if the China Initiative has in fact returned, especially given some of the legislations in the Congress trying to bring back officially the China Initiatives under different names. What is particularly troubling in this case is that Indiana University fired Professor Wang and Nyan Lee without due process, presuming guilt instead of innocence. In Nyan Lee's case, no reason was given at all. This is alarming to learn that the one-sided reason for Professor Wang's firing is that he did not disclose co-authors, which I assume is in grant applications. Regardless of the individualized facts on this case, these allegations alone have implications for the broader research community. We know researchers collaborate all the time with different groups, and some of our collaborators bring other collaborators whom we might not know at all. In these cases, the collaborators are actually not clearly defined. Criminal investigations and the firing of researchers based on allegations of missing collaborators will stop international collaborations. Needless to say, The investigations on Professor Wang and his firing created a huge fear among researchers of Chinese descent, from professors to students and postdocs. It is clear that such events, together with the legislation and the hostile rhetorics, are driving out these talents and deterring them from coming or harm U.S. competitiveness and national security. I'm proud that the AASF is voicing the concern of the scholar community on the firing of Professor Wang and Liang Li. I urge Indiana University leadership revoking their wrong decisions and call the scholar community to join us in supporting of Professor Wang and Liang Li. I urge you to join many of us to sign the AASF letter addressed to Indiana University leadership. And I know over 300 people have already signed on the letter, and numbers are rising. I also encourage you to donate to Professor Wang's legal defense fund through the GoFundMe page that was just set up by his son. What happened to me and to them could happen to any and many of us here. Let me end by reciting Martin Niemöller, the pastor who was encamped by Nazi Germany for 7 years. His poem was used by my dear colleague, Professor Yul Fink, in his call of MIT faculty to defend me when I was arrested. So the poem reads, first, they came for the communists. I did not speak up because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialist, and I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. Then they came to the trade unionist, and I did not speak up because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came to the Jews, and I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came to me, and there were no one left to speak for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those powerful words, Professor Chen. I just wanted to turn everyone's attention. Please look in the chat for all of those resources and links that Professor Chen and Liang Li shared, including AASF sign-on letter and the GoFundMe page in support of Liang Li and her family. I do want to just say real quick, special thanks to our partnering, some of our signatories and over 300 individuals who joined, and also to our colleagues at the Federation of Asian Professor Associations and the Asian American Academy of Science and Engineering for signing on and helping spread the word. All of this makes an impact. Now, I know not everyone is familiar with the case of Professor Wang, and so I just wanted to give also space for Brian to provide a little bit more context about this case, some of the legal issues there, and give a platform for those on the call today to ask some questions if you have any.
Thank you, Gisela. For those of you who have heard me speak before, you'll have to indulge me by allowing me to, and thanks again, Gisela, for giving me the opportunity to talk, to repeat what I've said many times before. Our experience as Chinese Americans, as immigrants, trying to assimilate ourselves, our families, into the United States, into America, has been, not without its obstacles. As a community, we and other Asian immigrants have overcome great obstacles to form the kind of strong bonds, relationships, and made significant contributions to the growth of America. But that said, as immigrants, we too have encountered the kind of obstacles, discrimination, racism, hate crimes, a lot of things that a lot of other immigrant groups have also suffered, who have come to America. And our history is replete with examples beginning over 200 years ago in the 19th century and the 20th century with all these sorts of things. Anti-Chinese laws that prevent us from owning land or property or voting or whatever, exercising basic civil rights granted to us under the Constitution have been under attack, whether it's in the laws from the 19th century to 20th century, and then now with the anti-alien land law stuff that you're going to hear from Clay or some other people later in this town hall. So it's one of those things where we have to step up and fight. When Gong's case came along and we were fighting the China initiative, it was a benchmark moment because AASF was born out of his case, the recognition and of the need to organize, to speak out, because unity breeds strength. And the only silver lining I can say for Nhan Li's case and Xiaofeng's case is that we're better organized than we were before. And we have to do still better. It starts with the letters that AASF is putting together to send on behalf and in support of Xiaofeng and the family. It will resonate with community organizations speaking out. I'm a member of the Committee of 100, and we have been collaborating and supporting this effort to help Xiaofeng and Nhan Li get through this in conjunction with AASF and spreading the word and doing what we think is important, which is increasing awareness. Again, many of you heard me speak during COVID and during the China Initiative era, and it's fair to say it's not gone away. There is a Congressional House subcommittee on the technological rivalry between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, led by Republicans in the House who want to seek the revival of the China Initiative. So we have to remain vigilant to try to speak up in opposition to that, because as Nhan Li mentioned, the China Initiative was an abysmal failure. The FBI acknowledged they made mistakes. The Department of Justice recognized it. And I think there's a general universal recognition, at least in some circles, our circles, that it was a big mistake. And the America's making a big mistake trying to discourage Chinese students from studying here and staying here and adding to the strength and contributions that we make to America, but also to the fact that in the technological rivalry between the two countries, it would be foolish for the United States to discourage immigrants like many of you or our families that have come over here seeking a new life and embracing some of the democratic principles and things that make America great. What I can say about the case, and I'll end there and answer questions later, is that there's nothing about Xiaofeng's case that makes him look any different than Professor Aming Hu, who I think is on this call attending, or Franklin Tao and others who were, and I'll use the term martyred, like Gong Chen during the China Initiative, who have had to go through and endure this type of harassment, persecution, what have you. And that's not to say that we discourage the enforcement of the law and the unlawful violation of our laws on transferring sensitive technology and things like that, even in the name of national security. But you got to do it right. You have to observe due process. You got to do your homework. If you're investigating these things, you should not rush to judgment. And we as a community need to stand up on the aspects of protecting due process and rights. And as I say, if not for yourselves, for your children and our children. So I'll be around here to answer questions as best I can about the case, other than to say that there appears to be no evidence that Xiaofeng's case involves any kind of unlawful transfer of technology or anything that would implicate the underlying concerns that led to the founding of the China Initiative. So I'll leave it at that, Gisela, and then I'll be available to answer questions as we go on.
Thank you so much, Brian. And we'll just direct this first question to you from Lee Collins before moving on, if we can unmute him. And in the meantime, we did receive a few questions from different folks about what the risks are now in collaborating with scientists in China and how they can navigate that space. If we can tack that onto Lee's question. Lee? Could we unmute Lee first? Well, maybe Brian, if you can tackle that first question.
Well, look, let me just say this about the current environment. It appears that notwithstanding that the government under the Biden administration took some steps back from the criminalization and the investigation of academics on foreign ties with China on research. We have seen a spike, if you will, in people getting stopped, academics being stopped who are traveling to and from China, either for personal family reasons or for academic reasons. By that, I mean, there may be a border stop at the airport, which AASF has a good webinar on that talks about what happens when that, what you should do when that happens. But the point is that there seemingly are now more and more reports of academics being stopped, questioned, and in some instances having their devices taken. By that, I mean phones and laptops. So you have to be vigilant about that sort of thing. And I encourage you to look at the webinar that I think is on the AASF website about travel, particularly to China. I do think that we should all be mindful that the universities are all under great stress and pressure because of the current administration's threat on withholding federal funding for various reasons, and relationships with China could be one of them. And so your university administration is probably very nervous, skittish, and concerned about anything that could be used to cut off institutional support to your institutions. And finally, I would say that, whereas we don't know under this new administration whether the FBI and the DOJ are going to return to the criminal stuff, it's fair to say that universities have come under some, I will say, scrutiny by the government agencies for failure to police the goings-on between their research endeavors and Chinese counterpart institutions. So universities are getting investigated and punished, if you will. There were recent settlements in Stanford, Ohio State, Maryland, and other schools that are having to respond to government allegations that they could have done better on training and reporting foreign ties and collaborations with foreign Chinese institutions. So that's where we're headed, and you've got to get your radar back up, folks, because it's like everything else, as I often am quoted by saying, ripping off the comedian Richard Pryor, which is that you take 3 steps forward and they pull you 2 back. And that's sort of what's going on right now. Thank you, Giselle.
Thank you so much, Brian. Next, I'd like to introduce our remaining panelists. We have today our AASF fellow, Peter F. Mickelson, who's the Luke Blossom Professor in the School of Humanities and Sciences and Professor of Physics at Stanford University, where he served as the chair of the physics department and a senior associate dean for the natural sciences. We also have Professor Stephen Kivelson, Prabhu Gold Family Professor at Stanford University, where he was awarded the 2025 Oliver E. Buckley Condensed Matter Physics Prize from the American Physical Society for his broad theoretical contributions to the understanding of correlated quantum systems. We also have Toby Smith, who's the Senior Vice President for Governmental Relations and Public Policy at the Association of American Universities, AAU, where he oversees their government relations activities and advocacy efforts, matters related to higher education and science and innovation policy. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Clay Ju, who's a civil rights and business litigation lawyer with more than 20 years of experience. He's admitted in California, Oregon, and the U.S. Supreme Court. He was recognized by the Daily Journal as the California Lawyer of the Year in Civil Rights Litigation in 2022, is a managing partner at the Hung Law Offices, and is also the co-founder of the Chinese American Legal Defense Alliance, CALDA. So I want to take a bit of a shift because we've been speaking to policymakers, we've been speaking to attorneys, and now I want to hear from the scholar community and ways that you have found effective in combating a lot of these issues. Now, Professor Peter Mickelson, you've been one of the leaders along with Professor Kivelson on a Stanford letter against the reinstatement of the China Initiative. Could you share some of your reactions to Congresswoman Meng's broad overview of all the different legislative efforts that are currently impacting the scholar community and many of these on-the-ground cases that were uplifted by Nian Li and Brian Sun?
Yeah, well, thank you, Gisela. All I can say is I'm troubled that this just goes on and on and on, and it seems to be getting worse. I thought things were getting better, say a year ago, 2 years ago, but it's not. And I think more communities need to get involved and speak out. And I don't know the most effective way to do that, but I think it's many voices have to be heard. So when Steve and I, I think started back, it was a letter to Merrick Garland, I think quite a few years ago now, to terminate the China initiative. At the time, I learned a lot just in helping put that letter together. And what drove us to do it, at least what drove me, was many of my colleagues, particularly Chinese American colleagues, were very troubled and impacted by this, even though personally it didn't affect them, but it affected the community. And I still think we're now returning to that era. And I think collectively, we have to speak out. We have to speak out clearly. And I also think, unfortunately, the days when maybe Gong Chen can comment on this, MIT was an incredible exception from my perspective that spoke out on his behalf very clearly, I thought. And I don't see that happening anymore. So I think that's important. Universities are under attack, and it's not going to stop. I think we have to speak out.
Thank you so much, Professor Mickelson. I want to turn next to Professor Kivelson. We understand the current climate right now in Congress that Chair Meng had shared. Could you speak, but based on the scholar perspective, how this climate would impact the academic and scientific community along with the talent pipeline here in the United States? We've also seen a strong focus in Congress on increasing scrutiny of international students coming from China, with one bill going as far as to call for a halt of all Chinese student visas. If some of these efforts actually succeeded, how would a complete halt on students from China actually impact the United States?
So, Gisela, I'm not broadly knowledgeable, but I can speak about my own particular subfield of physics, which is the physics of quantum materials, and in particular, I'm a theoretical physicist, so my students are theorists. An astonishing fraction of the students who have done their PhD under my supervision have been Chinese or Chinese American. That's true of my colleagues at top universities around the country. It's the single most important pipeline of talent. Our students, in part, go on to take jobs either in universities or in industry in the United States, in which case they continue to contribute directly to American competitiveness in science and technology. Some of them go back to other countries, including China. They remain among my closest collaborators, so I can tell you that in practical terms, they continue to contribute to the U.S. China, the U.S. Scientific progress. It is also clear that they bring back with them a vision of some of the wonderful things that still characterize universities in this country. I know this because my students come to study in the United States, either as students or postdocs. At least until the last year or two, this has been a clear pattern, and they come back with rather a rosy view of what the United States is. I think all of that is very much at risk now, with, of course, important personal consequences, but I think for the United States, dire consequences for our competitiveness, both in science and in technology.
Thank you so much, Professor Kivelson. Toby, it would be great to get your perspective from AAU on some of the issues I raised with Professor Kivelson. And because today's town hall is also meant to be a briefer for the community on what they should be paying attention to, what is AAU working on right now? What is happening in Congress that scholars, scientists, and the academic community should really be paying attention to?
Thanks, Gisela. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. Of course, AAU, I think many of you are familiar with us, but we represent 69 leading U.S. research universities, a few more publics than privates, but a majority, if you look, a majority of the federal research funding to academic institutions from the government ends up going to our university. So what are we concerned about? Well, first of all, we continue to be concerned about and know the importance of international talent to our graduate programs, to our faculty, who many are international, and in fact, in many areas of STEM, a majority are international. We're not born in the United States, and so that talent is critical, and it's been one of the ace in the holes for the United States. Partially driven by a research system that has supported not only domestic students, but international students to come here, study, be supported, work, and ideally stay. And in many instances, that talent has gone on, and we know in areas like artificial intelligence, a majority of the top AI firms that support our national security are founded by not people born here, but students who came here, studied, and started companies, and immigrants. So I think we're very concerned about the climate. Let me just say some of our immediate concerns is it goes beyond that, because right now we're seeing the cancellation of grants. We're seeing scientific agencies being reduced in their staffing to support research at our universities. We're seeing, and we're very worried about cuts that we're going to see in the upcoming budget. And just today, AAU joined with some of our other associations and some of our universities to sue the Department of Energy for reductions in support for the shared costs of doing research, the facilities administration costs, which was announced would be capped at a 15% rate on Friday. So those are big concerns, because that's the money that supports everybody in the system. But more from the perspective of this group, there are some things that I greatly worry about. You mentioned some of them, the congressional legislation to bring back the China initiative, which we have strongly opposed. There is another act which nobody has mentioned, but it passed the House unanimously with votes from Republicans as well as 31 Democrats, called the Deterrent Act. What would that act do? That act would require every faculty member who gets a gift above $480 from any individual in any foreign country to report that to the university, and then we'll ask, and our university will have to report that publicly. Now, mind you, not disclosing who the gift was to, but implying that that money came to the university. That act doesn't even exempt personal gifts from family members. So it is tremendously problematic. It also, in our view, would shut down our ability to collaborate with Chinese universities, because any contract would have to get a waiver for us to work with China or a Chinese entity from the Secretary of Education. So the Deterrent Act is a big concern for us. I also worry about legislation that would prohibit any Chinese student from coming here. That is incredibly short-sighted and wrong-headed. And then right now we are fighting, and I will tell you, our presidents, our board has been meeting regularly. And one of the things that has been on their mind is the visa revocations, and the fact that many of our universities are not getting information about why these are happening. They're learning after the fact, and after SEVIS records have been removed and their students have been asked to self-deport with little or no information as to why that is happening. And some suggest that these requests for self-deportation are based upon minor traffic infractions and the like. So it's very unclear, and our universities have very little knowledge and have not been able to exert much leverage to try and defend against these revocations, because we don't even know they're happening. And by the time we find out, it's very difficult. So that's a few things. I just want to thank and have appreciated the relationship and partnership we have had with AASF on fighting against some of these, as well as KPAC. And we've met with certainly Representative Meng already, and Judith, and look forward to continue to work on these very tough challenges in what has already been said, seems to be a time that they only going to become that much more challenging, and we'll look forward to continue to work on these jointly.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was very enlightening. And we'll turn back to Toby for any questions folks have. I know there was a lot of interest on the Deterrent Act. I want to turn to our last speaker, Clay, especially because you have recently just filed a lawsuit on Friday with regards to the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System record terminations on behalf of 4 student plaintiffs. Clay, you have been working on a lot of high impact litigation, both for the student community and also for professors, scientists, and researchers. Could you give us a little bit of background on what are the underlying allegations that you have for filing this complaint, and also a little bit about your work with SB 846 in Florida?
Thank you, Gisela. Good to be here. I've been working overtime in the last 5 days. We received a lot of information from Chinese American students here in this country, telling us about a abrupt and sudden cancellation of their F1 visa and the service records. So we started to look around and see how widespread that phenomenon is, and turns out a lot of students have been affected. So we have looked around and talked to many students. In the last 5 days, my team, about 5 lawyers, worked straight. We were able to represent 4 students, one from UC Berkeley, one from University of Columbia, and then Columbia University, and then University of Cincinnati, and another one from another university. Our goal is, of course, not to just represent those 4 students. Our goal is to seek a nationwide temporary restraining order and also an injunction against this kind of practice. We're trying to restore service records for all the affected students. It looks like we don't have the big picture yet. It looks like thousands of students have already been affected. There is no pattern. Based on the information I have right now, some of the students have arrest records, but never been convicted. Some of them have minor traffic violations, and some of them have very clean records. So it is random to me, and there's no explanation being provided by the agency as to why this is happening on a blanket scale. This has never been done before, and this is unprecedented. Service records been canceled or terminated. That's only been done on a very individualized basis. For example, one student failed to take enough classes to maintain full-time student status, or the student committed some kind of serious crime and has been convicted by a court of law. Those are very small number of cases. This time is different. This time is on a blanket scale, it's a mass termination of service records. Those basically are forcing the students to self-deport. As we all know, the government has tried to send people, with suspected gang affiliation to two planes and send them to a prison in Latin America. Now there's no due process for them. The students here being affected face the same dilemma because there's no opportunity to be heard. There's no warning, no notice. They have to leave the country right away. Otherwise, they would incur the so-called unlawful presence under immigration law. And that's why we are rushing everything right now. Actually, in a couple of hours, we will be filing a motion for a nationwide temporary restraining order, trying to restore service records for all the affected students. So fingers crossed. At the same time, we, CAUDA, that's a nonprofit organization I have been involved in, the Chinese American Legal Defense Alliance. We have been representing the students in Florida against a state law that basically prohibits on-campus employment of Chinese international students. That essentially would drive all the graduate students away because they need to work as graduate assistants, like a research assistant or a teaching assistant to their supervising professors. Without that experience, it's going to be very difficult for them to graduate, to gain experience, to participate lab projects with their professors. It is basically a Chinese Student Exclusion Act in my mind. So we have been fighting that case for about over a year now. And the good news came in around last month. A federal judge has issued an injunction against the law. The state of Florida, of course, has already appealed. We are already at the stage of fighting this case at the Court of Appeals. But at least for now, the international students from China in Florida are safe until the Court of Appeals rules in the future. So that's kind of the most recent updates on the two cases concerning the international students. And of course, CAUDA is also involved in the civil case on behalf of Professor Franklin Tao. We have organized a case for Franklin, and we're suing the University of Kansas right now for wrongful termination and also civil rights violations. And that case is at a very early stage. The case was filed in January this year.
Thank you so much, Clay. Now, we did receive a number of questions in advance, and we saw quite a large number of them related to immigration questions, especially for students with F1 visas. Why don't I turn to Clay, and perhaps Brian, you could share a bit of insights here. But one question that we had is what can be done to protect F1 students and others in the Chinese community from increased ICE activity? And based on what is the government claiming that Chinese students and scientists are threatening national security? So maybe, Clay, we can start with you and then turn to Brian.
Yeah, that's a huge question. I think it takes the entire village to move this needle. We have to work with legislators, congressmen. We have to work with all the civil rights organization, all the industry association, including AASF, trying to change the narrative. You know, the international students, the Chinese American professors and scholars here in this country are not a threat to the national security of this country. In fact, we are contributing tremendously to the competitiveness of this country in terms of scientific advancement, in terms of intellectual discovery, in terms of business development, and also diversity as well. So we need to together, we need to speak out and stand out and united as one front to change this narrative. And we are not spies for the Chinese government. We are not working for the Chinese Communist Party. We're here to pursue our American dream. That's the bottom line.
Thank you so much, Clay. And Brian?
Well, the undercurrent that Clay just alluded to is, of course, what I call the loyalty question. It isn't just so much how we look, although that, as immigrants, is something that always works against us in some quarters. But really, it's the loyalty issue because of the US-China technology rivalry thing. You can't turn on the news without having someone bashing on China and saying, okay, well, the tariffs against the non-Chinese are maybe questionable, but there seems to be a lot of saying, oh, let's go after the Chinese. Much like there was this sentiment against the Japanese in the 60s, for those of you who are old enough to remember those times and all that. So history repeats itself. But again, we have to educate and make people aware. We're not a community that's very good about utilizing media and doing demonstrations and all that sort of. I've said that many times. Just it's not what our community does. But we can with social media, and just regular media, and with the economic clout that I think we do have, and some of the other things, to make some of the elected officials listen on both sides of the aisle. You know, the China bashing isn't just restricted to one party. It's both parties that does some of this stuff, and we have to educate the Congress on both sides of the aisle, like we did on the China initiative, and where we got bipartisan support when we went to the Justice Department. And same thing on regular media, even the conservative media. There are ways and things that we can do if we mobilize, organize correctly, and handle our messaging effectively, both working with the current administration, the politicians, as well as, doing what Clay and others do and what I do, which is we have to fight in the courts. We have to fight in the courts. Judges and lawyers, from my perspective, arguably are the last bastion for democracy as we understand it and the rule of law. And it's important that we not get bullied and intimidated. And I won't go any further in terms of trying to say who are the targets of this kind of intimidation on this call, but suffice it to say, for our community, we need to speak up and organize on all the fronts, and particularly, I think, on the legal front, hence the need to help folks like Xiaofeng and his family fight on the legal fee stuff, to help Franklin Tao, to help others, to help them battle, because they can't do this alone. They have to have community support. You can't allow our folks to get ruined and destroyed without stepping up and supporting them. And I would urge do that. It's 25 years since we had the Wenho Lee case. And I remember a fundraiser I went to 25 years ago where it was a grassroots thing, and there were people finally becoming to realize that his case was not just about loyalty, but it was about due process. the same kinds of things we're dealing with today. And we have to get organized. We have to speak out and utilize the resources we have to be more effective. So the kinds of thing AASF and other groups are doing, C100 and others, we have to get together. And one thing I'm recalling is that the day after Wen Ho Lee was arrested, quarter century ago or more, C100 got 18 API organizations on a phone call, which was unheard of the next day. And that's the kind of stuff we need to do to rally and be effective and to speak out. So sorry, Gisela, I'm just waxing on, but that's the kind of stuff I'm urging people on this call to spread the gospel, if you will, and awareness, and let's get to it because we have to.
Thank you so much, Brian. Next, I see a question from Jeffrey Mervis, if we can get him unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yes, speaking of bullying and intimidation, I had a question originally for Representative Meng, but it can actually be for anyone on the panel. And this has to do with the House Select Committee on China, who last month sent a letter to 6 universities asking them, in effect, to be the State Department and vet any applications from Chinese students or scholars, and then also monitor their activity. And it assumes that universities know where these students have come from and questions whether they deserve to be in the United States. So I'm interested in whether people see that as a serious threat, and if so, what, if they are aware of it, and what universities should do in response. That would include Brian or other lawyers as well.
Yeah, I can speak to this initially and others can join in, but that committee has been very active. They issued a report last fall that I urge many of you to read about the research and integrity threats that they think the Chinese Communist Party poses to the national security and to the technological rivalry between the countries. So I urge you guys to read it. While the committees are supposedly initially had said they would work together and be bipartisan, it's still taking on a largely partisan approach, and it'll remain to be seen how the both sides collaborate. But it's fair to say, I think with the change in administration, you're going to see probably more, shall we say, cooperative responses from the FBI and the agencies than they had before, because there's been changes at the Bureau, there have been changes in a lot of places now where the pressure put on to bear on universities through grant withholding of grants is putting an axe over the head people, and it's going to end up chilling, freezing, and if not just shutting down collaborative relationships between the countries, even though the government says, oh, no, we don't want to shut down collaboration. We just want to stop the STEM unlawful flow of technology to China being perpetrated by the evil CCP. Now, how much of that really is real is what remains to be seen in terms of what is done from an enforcement perspective. But I'm suspecting that the FBI and other agencies in this administration will be much more deferential and responsive to these kinds of requests from the congressional committees, particularly the Select Committee, given the rhetoric we've seen from various departments in the administration, including State, Treasury, Commerce. Those are all, they're going to be more responsive and cooperative with those kinds of initiatives that basically are designed to stem the flow of postdocs from China into our labs and researching. And as you may be reading, a lot of professors are just going back to China because they aren't getting funded, they don't feel welcome, or China's offering them, 6x the number of postdocs that they would have in the United States. So that's the daunting challenges we face in the coming months and years. And all we can do is try to educate, stand up to bullying, and make the effective case that we can still pivot in a way that can make and preserve American research and technological advantages. And but it's going to be a tough road to hoe, and it requires all of us to getting together, all of us. I know I'm sounding like a tape recorder, Gisela, so I'll defer to others.
Thank you, Brian. And I want to turn to the other panelists with regards to Jeffrey Mervis's question. Would love to especially hear perhaps from Toby, since the university perspective was asked, and also from some of our academics here, like Professor Kibelson and Professor Mickelson.
So let me speak to the university perspective to Jeff's question. I think to expect that universities can vet and understand when there are individuals who are coming here as students who are threats is not something that we are able to do. We don't have the information that the U.S. State Department of Homeland Security has at the time that visas are applied to. And that's the time at which, if there are real risks associated with students, we feel they should not be granted a visa in the first place. It is not our responsibility to police or know, or again, we aren't a police force. We don't have that information. It would be very hard for us to do it. I think there are things we can do in terms of assessing risk beyond just individuals, about partnerships with entities and organizations in other countries. And we've seen some institutions like MIT who have really, as it relates to China with their China effort, started to create committees to assess that risk, think through whether we should be in those partnerships. I worry though about targeting individuals, or that we could imagine that we could do that well. I would also just want to say about the, I think to the letter that Jeff is referring to, there were some, I think, data and information in that letter. The information in the letter suggested that stay rates were only about 25%. We know from the National Statistical Organization at NSF and their work, they've been tracking stay rates for STEM PhD students from China and other countries, and those rates have been steady at about 85+%. So I think that is good data. So we are certainly engaging with that committee, trying to give them information to inform them. And again, as we've talked about throughout this call, stress the importance of international talent to helping our scientific enterprise, not just focused on the rare instances, which I believe are rare, where we may lose some knowledge or technology. And by the way, this is a bigger issue. To the extent it's an issue, it's not just university. I mean, it happens in government, it happens in industry, and they also have to make sure that they are protecting anything they do on behalf of the government. But we're certainly giving that a lot of consideration. But I think the notion that we can vet students after they get here is one that is misguided in a significant way.
Thank you so much, Toby. And if you could also just answer one question from the audience on, has there been instances where AAU has fought for an individual faculty or worked on that type of issue?
We usually, it is very hard for us in individual instances to get involved with specific cases involving our members. I'm just being honest. But where we are fighting is trying to keep legislation like the China Initiative, like the Deterrent Act, like those provisions that will prevent us from supporting and bringing in international talent, which we feel is vital to the work that we do, from being enacted.
Thank you so much, Toby. And Professor Kibelson and Professor Mickelson, would be great to get your thoughts on Jeffrey's question.
Yeah, so don't have any technical knowledge to share here, but it is clear that on many grounds, universities are under attack. I think of the same poem that Professor Gang Chen quoted, that they go after the universities one at a time. I think this is a time when the universities have to stand up for many principles. One of the most important and immediate ones right now is that we have to be immediate in our support for the students who've had their visas withdrawn without any due process. But more generally, I think that it's important for anybody who has roots to university administrations to express support for holding to the university's principles, defending faculty members, students, and academic freedom within the university against these enormous pressures that are being brought to bear.
Thank you, Professor Kivelsen. And Peter?
Well, I don't know if I have too much to add, but with regards to the letter to the certain selected universities, I should say, which included Stanford, from the House Select Committee Chair about transparency from universities on national security risks, I think there were a number of inaccuracies or misleading statements, and I think Toby referred to one of them about the number of students who stay is very low. That's not true, although it wasn't clear why that was in there. I think this seemed to me a bit of a fishing expedition to see what the responses would be. But I do know, and there's a statement on our university website from the president's office, that they are addressing these questions, but they're not going to release any identifiable information about any particular student. For what that's worth. Okay, so
but
anyway.
But they did say they would cover the legal costs of any student whose visa was withdrawn.
Is that right? Okay,
yeah.
That could be. But I was going to ask just another question, follow up real quick with something Toby mentioned. The Deterrent Act, I thought the threshold for reporting a gift was $0 for countries such as China. Is that correct?
Peter, there's different thresholds. The threshold for faculty reporting of a gift is to the university, not to the government, is 480. It's the same reporting threshold used for members of Congress in gifts. Contracts of $2,000 would be covered. I believe the gift reporting level goes down, but not to zero for universities as a whole. What I'd say, though, is that threshold doesn't exempt, like I said, if you have family members paying for a plane ticket, that is not exempted under the current legislation. If you're from a foreign country and they pay for your plane ticket, or in my instance, my wife is British, if I were a faculty member, they're supporting my children to go to college and they're sending money, that would be reported. So my concern is we'll have lots of staff on our campuses plugging all this data into a computer. It will, and by the way, that includes not only China, it includes Canada. If you get a gift and your parents live in Ottawa. So this is kind of the craziness that we're seeing. So it's still 480, very low threshold for an individual faculty member and a gift they receive. And that idea of right now you have to report if you're getting research funds to your research agency, but the idea that personal gifts would be counted is just really problematic in our eyes.
Thank you so much, Toby. Now, in the current climate, it's very easy to get lost in the forest. And in this room, we have the pleasure of being with leaders across the spectrum on all the issues that impact the Asian American and broader scholar community, from student visa revocation lawsuits to higher ed legislation to those directly impacted by unjust scrutiny and investigations by their university or the federal government. For all the panelists, to keep our community focused, I want to raise one final question. If there was only one thing that you could ask of the scholar community in one sentence to mobilize around, to fight for, what would it be? And if I could perhaps start with Clay. Well, it can be open to all the panelists. I'll turn to Brian.
Okay, well, for me, as I said before, because this is a big concern of the Committee of 100 and many other API groups, it's the loyalty question, educating people about that. And you know, and I've talked about, and my father was a Vietnam vet. He served in Vietnam, decorated, all that, you know, but there's other things like what AASF is doing, which is producing mini documentaries about the invaluable contributions that researchers and scientists, the people on this call, do for America and what makes it so great. And to include, you know, the Chinese American scholars or researchers amongst that and getting the word out of their contributions is an important component to rebutting some of this ingrained sort of antipathy that exists towards Chinese Americans, number one. And two, that they're not only contributing, but, you know, we want to retain and encourage that kind of talent to come here. I mean, I'm talking purely on the academic space here, Gisela. What the scholars can do for themselves and for the greater cause is to show how valuable you are to this country. And then the lawyers can do what we can to fend off some of these misguided, at times, investigations. I'm not saying everything is misguided, but in many of these type of cases that the China initiative shown was just a misallocation of federal resources and put it in the direction of what maybe the government should be placing their resources, which is the unlawful exporting of our valuable technology. But what can the scholars do? You can get your own message out, speak up for yourselves, and show how valuable you are to the country. That'll help me when I go into meetings with the government and I'm talking to them about why you're discouraging, you know, this kind of stuff, with the best and most brilliant people in China being discouraged from coming over there, like some of their mentors, many of whom are on this call. It's ridiculous. It's not only not sensible, but America is sort of shooting themselves in the foot. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir here, Gisela, but that's, I think, what the scholars can do a better job of, and what AASF and others are doing, and C100's doing. We're going out and telling them, you know, about our contributions, and even get it into our schools, get into the education curriculums. You know, we have to do a better job of that. So, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ryan. Don't say sorry. You've been one of the most valiant fighters and protectors for the scholar community since Dr. Wenho Lee. So thank you so much. And Toby, same question for you and the other panelists. What can the scholar community do if there was really one thing you could ask?
Well, I think telling the story of the contributions of the Asian American community to science and to the country. But at the same time, I think it is a time where we have to remind people of their very values that are so important, that we fight for, we defend, and is one of the things that I think why so many of you are here. And that is that value system that makes us different from the very countries that we're talking about, their governments, that we need to go and defend. It's why I think there are so few in some of the cases and some of the instances that are being suggested where people are not loyal to the country. I think they're overblown, because we have one of the best things going for it. It is a value system. We need to protect that. And I would ask all the scholars to help in that fight to do that and explain that to members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, why they believe in those values and why we have to defend them.
Thank you, Toby. And Peter and Steve, you've led the Stanford letter. If there's something you'd want the community to stay focused on, what would it be?
I think what Toby just said is very important, that, you know, we should really emphasize the impact on students coming here from China and other countries, that exposure to our free and open society, this has a huge impact, not just on the science, but on the affection for our country. And I think we're in danger of losing that. And that is really a precious resource.
Thank you, Peter and Steve.
Well, I agree with all these things, but there is an immediate crisis, which is the students who've had their visas revoked without any due process. They are the most powerless people in this. And I think that whatever can be done to back them up and reassure them is of immediate importance.
Thank you, Steve. And Gang and Kai, as our AASF board leaders, did you have any one thing that you wanted to ask from our communities?
I would say that help us collect data. You know, when you have when you can speak with voice data to do advocacy work, is more effective. So one of the things I sent in the chat was the recent Senate hearing by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, in which the chair said every Chinese student was agent for CCP. I think he was based on the logic that because of the transnational repression by Chinese government, if you have a relative in China, you'll be an agent. So this is a difficult, very troubling logic, because then the government doesn't need any evidence. This is the kind of logic used in terms of Japanese American during World War II. I think that one example of such a data would be, for example, Cornell. I sent in the chat. Cornell collects surveyed international students and showing students with different ethnic backgrounds, actually, including from China, India, and other places, have a similar behaviors. So that, I think with this kind of data, with the kind of data, what percentage of graduating students, graduated from our institutions, stay in the US and work here. And those are kind of data that could be helpful so I encourage our community to reach out to their universities and to encourage university to help doing similar data or participate in the data collection process by AASF. That can be helpful for the community.
Thank you, Kai. And Gang?
I'll just quote Kai Lee. I think Kai like to say, together we can move mountains. I think we need to support each other and really care for those students and faculty, like Xiaofeng Wang's case, and really supporting them and supporting each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Gang. And Yanli, I really wanted to give you the final word here. What can the scholar community do for you and your family if there was one thing?
I want to use this opportunity to thank all the participants of today's hall meeting, and greet each and every one of you who generously contribute towards our legal expense. Your support has been a powerful source of strength during this most difficult time in our lives. And every donation, no matter the size, reflects not just the financial help, but also solidarities, and encouragement, and belief in fairness. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for standing with us Your kindness means more than words can express. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyanli. Thank you for your courage and your willingness to fight for your family. We appreciate all of our panelists for not only joining us today, but their constant perseverance to fight for the scholar community. I do want to share with you all that in light of all the challenges ahead, ASF is working to ensure that we have multiple Know Your Rights sessions to introduce the scholar community with attorneys in different expertise, from employment, immigration to criminal defense. I want to flag that we please save the date for our next one, which is on travel and immigration with immigration attorney Olivia Lee. That's scheduled for the 25th of this month. We weren't able to tackle all of the questions, but we saw many of the questions sent in advance were with regards to whether you should be traveling depending on your immigration status. And as you all know, that requires individualized assessment and a much smaller conversation with an attorney who is representing you. And we want to make sure that you all have those resources in the times ahead. So thank you so much again. And I'd like to turn over today's town hall to our webinar committee chair, Professor Xiaodong Zhang.
Thank you, Gisela. Thank you for all the participants in this webinar with many excellent questions, which cannot be answered one by one due to time limit. We'd like to thank Congresswoman Grace Meng for her inspiring keynote. There's a long list of panelists, including 2 legal expert and lawyers, Brian Sun and Clay Chu, and 4 AASF fellows, Professors Michelson, Kylie, Kervolson, and Gang Chen. And also we have CPAT Executive Director Judith and Toby Smith, a leader from AAU. And Gisela, thank you for moderating the panel presentations and discussions. I also would like to mention Nancy Chin, who has worked very hard to provide technical support for this webinar. Thank you, Nancy. Finally, we sincerely thank Ms. Nianli Ma, wife of Professor Xiaofeng Wang, for giving us a presentation during such a difficult time for the family. You and the family have our full support as you seek the justice. Thank you again for your participation. We hope to see you in the next AASF webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.